Welcome back. All right, so news of the day. Normally it involves me wearing the jersey of a team that's going through news stuff. I wish it wasn't Buffalo. I'm being honest. I really wish it wasn't Buffalo. I really wish it wasn't Buffalo, but yet I get it. I totally get it. And for Kevin Adams, welcome to the postseason. And with postseason in Buffalo, it just means the season's over, not that you're in the playoffs. So that's part of the problem. So your three stars for the week, we'll start there. Connor McDavid's first star because he has to be. Kaprizov is second star because he was fantastic this last 7 days. And Marc-Andre Fleury is third. So no argument with any of those. I'm good with that. That's your three stars of the week. Kudos to all three of them. And let's move on to Jack Eichel. So the jersey I'm wearing is my Jack Eichel. I got this one on sale because he changed his number from 15 to 9. It looks like he may be changing his jersey from Sabres to something else. So he's upset, and he feels that there's a disconnect between himself and the organization. And what upset him is that dealing with a herniated disc in his neck, basically the team told him not to get surgery. And there are certain amounts of controls that teams have always had with players. What Eichel's complaining about now wouldn't have been news 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if we heard this guy wants to have surgery and the GM said no, or the owner said no, or we'd say, yeah, well, that's just sort of how that works. Famously, Bobby Clarke and Eric Lindros were always at it because Lindros had obvious concussion issues, and as far as Bobby Clarke was concerned, he could play it out. He could play it off. Just keep playing, play through it. And because Lindros didn't want to play through injuries, and Bobby Clarke thought that was a sign of weakness, that felt like that was what a lot of the disconnect was. So it is not new to the NHL for teams to feel this way. That okay, so you're hurting, but we need you in the lineup. So if you can just play through the pain, or if you have surgery, you're going to be out for 6 months. So if you can just go through treatment and we'll give you some kind of a rehab, and it'll be fine. And this is an issue. Eichel is now saying basically, look, I made the decision. And this was the thing too, when he was, day to day, and they were saying he isn't really all that hurt. And then he went out and he went to an external source for medical information, and then it was, well, he can't return to the team because of protocols right away. And it was like, it just felt weird at the time. It felt like the Sabres were dealing with it one way, and he said no, and he dealt with it on his own. And you know what? At 24 years of age, dealing with a herniated disc in your neck, you don't want to be dealing with a situation that it's gonna be there with you for the rest of your life. You don't want to be in a situation either where you're gonna make it worse. So I don't have a problem with what Eichel did, but Eichel's basically saying, yeah, so this is causing a problem, and I don't know what's gonna happen. And the thing is, he says, but for now, obviously I'm here, meaning with the Buffalo Sabres. That's not a ringing endorsement. That's not, if you ask your spouse, so are you happy? And their answer is, well, I'm here, aren't I? It's not a ringing endorsement. It's not, well, I still got my stuff in the closet, so I guess. Sure. Fine. So yeah, this appears to be a situation that's headed towards some sort of an explosion. And again, for Buffalo, they need to show some upward motion next year in the standings. You can't rebuild when you're not done rebuilding. If your neighbor says, I was thinking about rebuilding my house, and you look at it and you go, dude, you're not even done the foundation yet. I'm thinking about ripping the foundation out. You're insane. That's how this feels. Buffalo hasn't got anywhere near the playoffs, and now we're looking at him going, maybe we're in for a rebuild. Oh, and again, part of what happens here is you end up in the situation where for other players on the team, it has to affect them too. So Sam Reinhart's an RFA. How difficult is he going to be as an RFA looking at this situation if he's perhaps close to Eichel? Or Ristolainen. Ristolainen as well. Basically saying he's choked at the way this season's gone. He's played over 500 games in his career. He's never played a single game in the playoffs. And he said he's done with rebuilding. He's done with it. He's finished. And he doesn't care whether he's in Buffalo next year or not. He doesn't care where he is as long as he has a chance to win. Probably not a ringing endorsement for him returning with Buffalo next year either. And again, for the general manager, this means that Kevyn Adams' phone's going to be ringing off the hook, with teams saying, all right, so I hear Eichel wants out. That might eat into what we otherwise would offer you. And then, I mean, as this goes, Eichel may very well turn around and make it worse for Buffalo, as players sometimes do, and say, I want to go to that location, thus making the return less than it possibly could have been otherwise, because then you're not bidding with other teams. Ryan Kessler, famously with the Canucks, said, I want to go to Anaheim, and that was it. And so the Canucks were limited in what they could get back from Anaheim. Not that fans didn't complain anyways. But, you know, the other option would have been to hold on to Kessler and him being all disgruntled and ticked off, and then fans being upset that way too. So, can't win. And right now the Sabres can't either, because it's clear that the whole situation with Eichel has completely blown up. And because if he's saying this publicly, it's bad. It's bad. He's been pretty diplomatic the whole way through. He's been vocal about being frustrated with the team's lack of success on the ice, but there's still been that professionalism, and you can feel that he's angry about how this turned out. And I can understand that. If you feel like your employer doesn't really care that you're healthy and that you're just, you know, a body on the ice to them, yeah, that could get frustrating. So we'll see what happens with Buffalo over the next few months. Might they work out something with Seattle coming in, right? Eichel wants a clean slate. Seattle could be the cleanest slate there is. And I know how crazy that sounds. It's absolutely ridiculous. And since it's 2021, sure, why not? Let's do something ridiculous. So we'll see what happens with Eichel. But it's going to take a lot. I don't know that he necessarily gets moved in the offseason, but it's going to take a lot of reaching out from this organization. It's not a money thing, obviously. He's making all kinds of money. And his contract's, you know, there for a long time. But it's that trust between player and organization that once that's broken, that can be tough to get back. Speaking of getting back, Carey Price will not return to play on Wednesday, but Dominic Ducharme has assured everybody that he'll be back for the playoffs. The thing is, if you don't get him into a regular season game, you don't get him warmed up, we don't know exactly what we're going to get with him in the playoffs either. So that's a tough situation to put him in. And I'm not saying Price can't do it. He can. But I would not be surprised if Jake Allen is the starter at the beginning of the playoffs for Montreal. That would not entirely surprise me. So we'll see what happens with Price, but Montreal's going to be fascinating to watch. Gallagher back at practice today. Looks like he's gearing up. He's almost ready to come back, so that's good news too. Laine. Patrick Laine. So we've talked about Eichel. Let's talk about Laine. Also missing the playoffs. Miserable season for Columbus, but Laine says he's enjoyed every minute he's been in Columbus. He really loves being there, and he wants to come back next year. Now, Laine's a restricted free agent. He has limited say in where he would go. If he was a UFA, we might be having a different conversation, but he's not. So as an RFA, he doesn't have any leverage this year. The first time he was an RFA, he kind of sort of did, where, you know, he could have maybe got more money and more term if he'd pushed Winnipeg a little further, and Winnipeg had said, you know what, fine, we'll just trade your rights. But he doesn't have any sort of negotiating power. His first 11 games in Columbus, he did. 6 goals, 4 assists, 10 points. The next 34 games, 4 goals, 7 assists for 11 points. So he may have been having a lot of fun, but if I'm Jarmo Kekalainen watching this, I'm not. And so in the offseason, and I've mentioned this, I would not be surprised. Columbus should at least look into hiring a European coach. We are well overdue for having a European-trained coach in the National Hockey League. And it might be the best thing for Columbus, a team that's had some prominent players from overseas. So we'll see what Columbus does and how creative they get in their hiring process. They may very well hire somebody North American. They may very well not look outside North America, but we're overdue. There's some very good coaches overseas, some very good coaches in Europe. And just because it hasn't worked the previous couple of times it's been tried, and I know people are going to say, what about Ralph Krueger? Well, Ralph Krueger was in North America first. He's North American born. So And at the very least, he'd coached the Oilers. He'd been in the NHL before as a coach. I'm talking about full-fledged European, the next after Alpo Suhonen. And Alpo Suhonen really was in a rough situation, and that wasn't optimal for anybody. So we'll see. We'll see what they do. But for Columbus, I think they're going to have to probably think outside the box a little bit. Who's going to get the most out of Line A? Who's going to get the most out of this team? Who's going to get that goal scoring up to where you need it to be? And and look at it from there. But Columbus is going to be fun to watch in the offseason too. Ovechkin, almost ready to return. Skating, wearing full contact jersey, and skating, meaning he's wearing a red jersey, which means he's top two lines. So, yeah, Ovechkin ready to return. That's good news for Washington, and that would definitely allay some fears going into the playoffs if Ovechkin is 100% and good to go. So we'll see what happens there, but for the Caps, it's been an interesting last month, I'll say, and we'll see how things go for them going into the playoffs. We'll see how the Kuznetsov situation works itself out. Of course, Samsonov's caught up in that too, and all of that. So, one thing I'll say for this offseason, because it's going to feel more like a regular offseason, because we're going towards an 82-game schedule in October. We know it's going to work. I expect a lot more player movement, and you've got the expansion draft, and we also have an offseason that's a month shorter than normal. So it's going to be a pretty crazy offseason for, I would say, almost every team. I think we're going to see dramatic changes in some franchises in the offseason. Interestingly enough, so I mentioned this last week when we heard that Logan Couture wasn't going to go over and play for Team Canada. And apparently Alexi Lafreniere of the New York Rangers is declining an invitation to try out for Team Canada. And this follows up Keandre Miller and Fox as well. Adam Fox of the New York Rangers have already declined playing for Team USA. The schedule has been absolutely ridiculous. And the idea of going over and playing overseas to play in a tournament, I can understand why players are looking at that and saying, you know what, we're good. We're going to go home. We're going to relax for the summer. It's a month shorter than normal, as I said, and we're just going to just depressurize. Because this last 18 months has been crazy for everybody. So I totally understand why they would just turn it down at this point. So we'll see. We'll see what kind of teams they cobble together for Team Canada and Team USA. And should be fascinating to see how that works out, how that tournament goes. And let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. And Buffalo fans, I really wish we were hearing about how great everything was and how optimistic everybody was in the organization. This is going to take some work. And then the other side of that too is, what odds are there that Linus Ullmark right now is looking at all this and saying, I'd like to stay long term? Because for Ullmark at this stage, he would likely sign I would say 3 or 4 year career, and that'll take up a lot of the rest of his time in the NHL. He may not want to do that in Buffalo. And then Buffalo's looking for a top line center, a top goal scorer, and potentially a top 4 defenseman if Ristolainen ends up being out as well. Man. All right. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.